Well, good evening, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, yesterday morning I walked out to the point at Cornelian Bay here in Hobart, just behind the Cornelian Bay Cemetery, and I had a chance to look again at the modest memorial that has been erected there to all of the people that perished in the CivX disaster in 2001. Honourable members would remember some 353 men, women and children. I think there was an estimated 146 children on CivX who drowned that terrible night. Drowned alone. It wasn't until the next day we understand that civilian Indonesian vessels were in the area, fishing boats, and were able to save a small number of people. Deputy Speaker, what a chilling reminder of the horror of Australia's asylum seeker history. And it's not that CivX was the only horror to recount. In fact, our history is peppered with numerous instances of horrors and scandals. For example, also in 2001, when the merchant ship, the Tampa, picked up some 433 men, women and children from an asylum seeker boat that was also sinking. And the scandal when the then Prime Minister John Howard dispatched almost 50 Special Air Service soldiers by boat to board the Tampa and to ensure it would not bring those unfortunate souls to Australia. Also that year, the Children Overboard scandal, when the then Howard government made a point of telling the Australian community that asylum seekers would stoop so low as to throw their children overboard in an attempt to facilitate them being rescued by Australian authorities. But we don't have to just focus on 2001 and the Howard government, Deputy Speaker. What about just last year when the government repealed the Medivac legislation that required nothing more than sick asylum seekers in offshore detention to be brought to Australia for critical medical help. But the government, just when you thought it had stooped as low as it could get, it stooped even lower by repealing that very sensible law to just ensure that sick asylum seekers could get medical attention. And I regret to say, Deputy Speaker, that neither major party has clean hands here. I've just rattled off a number of episodes involving coalition governments. But let's not forget it was the Keating Labor government in 1992 that actually invented mandatory detention, a creation of the Labor Party. And it's the Labor Party these days that is in lockstep with the coalition government when it comes to continuing support for mandatory detention, continuing preparedness to use offshore processing, full support for measures like towbacks, as dangerous and as inhumane as that might be, or as it is. So no one's got clean hands here when it comes to Australia's response to asylum seekers. Now, turning my mind to the bill itself, Deputy Speaker, that's before the House, there have been numerous organisations have lodged complaints about this bill. Numerous organisations have made it very, very clear what's wrong with this bill. And in fact, I would refer honourable members to, if they read nothing more, at least read the summary of the bill's digest, which notes that the bill was referred to the Senate Standing Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs for inquiry and report by 5th of August. Submissions to the inquiry raised numerous concerns with the bill. Common themes identified in submissions were that the measures contained in the bill are unnecessary and disproportionate in relation to the security risks posed in immigration detention, that the Minister's power to prohibit items is unreasonably broad, and specifically that prohibiting mobile phones in immigration detention will unreasonably limit detainees' rights to privacy and political communication and their contact with family members and legal representatives. Stakeholders also expressed concern about the expansion of coercive powers, such as strip searches. Deputy Speaker, the Bill's Digest also notes that the Standing Committee for the Scrutiny Bills raised concerns that the amendments unduly infringe detainees' personal rights and liberties because the powers will apply to the entire detention population, not just high-risk detainees. It also raised concerns about prohibited things being determined by the Minister instead of specified in the Act, and broad discretionary powers being provided to the Minister and the delegation of ministry powers. The Parliamentary Joint Committee on Human Rights noted that the bill's measures were likely to engage and could limit a range of rights, including the right to privacy, right to humane treatment in detention, right to protection of the family, right to freedom of expression, children's rights, and the prohibition against torture, cruel, inhumane and degrading treatment of punishment. I could go on, Deputy Speaker. The point I'm making is that a number of parliamentary inquiries have looked at this bill in detail and have taken evidence and submissions from numerous highly regarded organisations. And there has been an almost universal condemnation of this bill, an agreement that this bill must not be supported. And I want to put it on the public record absolutely clearly here, Deputy Speaker, that it does not have my support. It didn't have my support in 2017 when the LNP or the coalition government first tried to progress these matters, and it doesn't have my support tonight, and it never will have my support. Deputy Speaker, to my mind, the problem here is that this bill continues the practice of treating asylum seekers as criminals and the practice of treating detention centres as jails. And that's where it just completely loses all touch with reality. The fact is, it is not illegal to seek asylum in another country. The people who are coming to Australia seeking our protection have committed no crime, are committing no crime, are not convicted of any crime. So why on earth do a succession of governments remain committed to treating them like criminals and turning their detention centres, which frankly should be open centres, these people should be in community detention? Why does a succession of governments continue their determination to turn these detention centres into jail? I'd remind members, through you, Deputy Speaker, that Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948 states very clearly that everyone has a right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. I'll say that again. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 clearly states, and I quote, everyone has a right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. But Deputy Speaker, that's not the only place to find such sentiments. Obviously, the right is developed and enshrined in the Refugee Convention of 1951. The fact is, Deputy Speaker, that Australia is morally obliged and obliged through international agreements which we've signed up to in good faith in years gone by. We are morally and legally obliged in international law that when someone comes to our shores, by whatever means, boat or aeroplane, that we give them immediate protection. And then as quickly and as effectively as we can, we hear their claims and determine the accuracy or not of those claims. And of course, most asylum seekers who have made it to Australia we have found that their claims have been absolutely accurate. And when they are absolutely accurate, we are morally and legally obliged to give them permanent refuge in our lucky country. That's what we should be doing. We have no right in any conventional international law or agreement to treat these unfortunate souls as criminals and to lean on policies of deterrence and punishment. And at this point, I will echo the comments from the member for Melbourne just before me, Deputy Speaker, who elaborated on these points very effectively. The fact that our response to asylum seekers is a policy that has long been based on deterrence and punishment. There's no humanity in it. There's no humanity in taking someone's mobile phone away from them so they can't keep in touch with their family, so they can't keep in touch when they want to or need to with legal representatives, and so they can even go to the media when they are being mistreated in these detention centres. Moreover, Deputy Speaker, we've got to stop. Governments have got to stop acting illegally themselves, because all too often the criminal in this whole sorry saga is the government of the day. Deputy Speaker, I'd remind through you the members of this House that we, as a signatory to the Rome Statute, are committing crimes against humanity every time we detain someone indefinitely without conviction for any offence. I'll make that point again. Australian governments commit crimes against humanity according to the Rome Statute every time we lock up an asylum seeker in inhumane conditions, indefinitely without conviction or any offence. Deputy Speaker, in closing, I make the point I didn't support this bill in 2017 and I don't support it tonight. And I do not believe that the changes that have been made around the margins of this bill from the 2017 version, I don't believe that they have made it even remotely acceptable. And I agree with the member for Melbourne. It's not amendable. It's trashable. It's a garbage bill. There's no way this bill could be amended to make it supportable. And I urge the government and I urge the opposition to think afresh about alternative responses to asylum seeker. In recent years, I moved a private member's bill that proposed a legislative framework for an alternative response to asylum seekers, one that was consistent with international law and relied on a genuine regional approach overseen by the UNHCR, with quotas for countries to accept people from regional processing centres. That bill received no support from the coalition government at the time and no support from the Labor opposition at the time. But the point is, until the government and the opposition start to genuinely consider alternative approaches, we will continue with this immoral and illegal policy framework based on deterrence and punishment. There are so many better ways we could be doing this, and starting with stop regarding asylum seekers as a security challenge, a matter for border force, and starting to understand that this is a global humanitarian challenge. And as one of the richest and luckiest, most fortunate countries in the world, there is no country a better place than Australia to be a global leader in this space, a global leader in developing alternative responses to asylum seekers, responses that are consistent with the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a response that is consistent with the 1951 Refugee Convention, a response that is consistent with our obligations under the Rome Statute. You know, every time we trash these international agreements, we dishonour the men and women who have occupied our benches before us and have signed up in good faith to these international agreements. We are an international pariah, Deputy Speaker, when it comes to our nation's response to asylum seekers. And it is indeed a dark stain in this country's history book, a dark stain that will take a long time to erase if ever it can be erased. But I tell you what, Deputy Speaker, we could start in one small way tonight by voting down this bill. And I call out to the Labor Party. Your supporters are expecting you to vote down this bill, and from the speeches it sounds like you will. So I look across my laptop screen to the government and say, why on earth are you progressing this unless you're wanting to be cruel by design to the people who are coming to our country in good faith, thinking that we are a rich, lucky and law-abiding country and we will give them refuge. And what do we do instead? We lock them up indefinitely. We take their phones away. We don't care about their mental health. If they're unfortunate enough to be on Manus Island or in Nauru, in those, you call them open camps, I call them gulags. If they're unlucky enough to be there and to be sick, that we're so cruel that we won't even bring them to Australia for medical treatment. Deputy Speaker, I'll end my remarks there. This bill does not have my support. It didn't in 2007. It doesn't tonight, and it never will. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.